Bonjour à tous, bienvenue à la 6e édition de la remise en forme de mototrailaventure. Le beau temps va s'en venir, ça sera pas là.
Well, as you just heard, we were attending the 6th edition of the Mototrailaventure Spring Training Day. And if you know the format for these events, usually you have a big group meeting and then you're broken up into your subgroups and you have another meeting. There's our instructor. He's from the BMW school, and they graciously have been supplying the instructors for the last few years that we've attended this event. Once again, this is Riley from the Awesome Players Off-Road Motorcycle Club, and I'll be your host. And at this event, I was joined by JP, Marc, and Super Dave. Super Dave on his F800GS, JP on his WR250, and Marc on his Africa Twin. The last few years, this event has been held in a kind of sandpit quarry just off the island of Montreal, and the owner is gracious enough to let Mototrailaventure use this site once a year. So we are very thankful for that because it is quite a playground. There's a really wide variety of terrains available. There's 2-track through the forest, there's mud, there's sand, there's hill climbs. There's all kinds of terrain, which makes it a great place for everybody to shake off the winter cobwebs. On this day, they had broken us up into 3 groups. We had a beginner, an intermediate, and an advanced group. And once again, if you watch last year's video, obviously the advanced group encompasses quite a wide range because I'm in the advanced group, and there's other guys in the advanced groups who can probably do a wheelie for about a mile. So I was definitely at the bottom end of the advanced group. So we started off and headed out, and as you can see, the terrain was pretty wet. We'd had a lot of rain in the week preceding this event. I'm not going to get into any specifics of what the exercises were really because I'm not one of the instructors, and you certainly don't want to get second-hand instruction from me. But suffice it to say, it started off pretty mellow with riding around some cones. And don't forget, for a lot of the people at this event, myself included, this was either the first or second ride of the year. So it was nice to be able to just feel the bike moving around underneath us, play with the throttle and clutch, and there you see even Marc, who's a very skilled rider, just about dumped the Africa Twin just coming to a stop. So we're all definitely a little bit rusty. The next little event was a little more challenging. You had to drive into a box of 4 cones and do a circle. You're almost at, depending on your bike, you're pretty close to full lock. And then you would drive out of that into another box and do a circle going the opposite direction. You can see Super Dave doing it. Then it was my turn on the 701. And one thing I found out about this bike is that the steering lock is not super wide. Like, I'm running almost right on the steering stops here. Other than the BMW instructors, you can see here there were some other volunteers. Here is Serge, who did the Classique with us in 2015, and he's one of their expert riders. And I think, like most people have a preferred direction where they're better at turning and skidding. And you can see, even though this isn't a very big bike, I'm barely making it. And a lot of guys on those larger bikes, like the F800s, which have a much bigger wheelbase, were able to do this. I found myself kind of banging into the steering lock there. Here you can see Dave doing his second go round.
Nice, Dave, nice!
At the next station, we had to do a figure 8. And once again, I found myself occasionally hitting the steering stop on the Husky. And as you can see, if you look around at all the different bikes, our group was pretty varied. We had the biggest bikes were probably a 1200GS Adventure, and the smallest bike would have been something like a KTM 350. So quite a wide range of bikes. One thing I will say is that a lot of the exercises on this this training day are geared for guys on bigger bikes, and certainly the focus of the BMW instructors is for guys on, you know, 1200GS, F800GS, managing big bikes off-road. On the second go-round, where we are doing our little circle here in the box, I actually put my foot down there, and the instructor was nice enough to come over and give me a few little tips, which basically amounted to something like learn how to ride. So I took that advice to heart. As with most riding, one of the key messages seems to be look where you want to go, and here's one of the instructors acting as a lure to try and get the candidate to really look not down at his front wheel but at him. Then it was my turn into the counterclockwise little box here, and as you can see, I already missed one cone, but as per the advice I was given, I kept it a little slower and kept my eyes looking where I wanted to go, and in the end that worked out a lot better.
Thank you.
The next exercise involved skidding around a cone. You were supposed to roar up to this center cone you see here, lock the rear brake, swing the rear of the bike around, and then take off. And then the next few spots you came up to, you were supposed to kind of side swipe a cone by locking and skidding the rear of the bike out. And this was pretty tough. The ground here wasn't super slippery, and if you came in and got on the rear brakes too early, you kind of locked it up in the straights, and then you kind of ran out of steam. And if you really wanted to get that bike to swing around, you really had to commit to locking that rear tire and leaning it over. Some of the guys on the big bikes were throwing some good dirt.
Hey, KLR boy. Oh, somebody down.
Here you can see JP coming, and he's really good at those skid turns because he actually practices them quite a lot, but he's usually better than that, so the terrain was not great. Here's Marc on the Africa Twin, and had a good skid, but not as easy as it looks. Once again, JP on the WR250, and I think he just wasn't going fast enough there, because JP definitely, when you're out trail riding with him, can usually spin that WR250 around pretty quick without too much fuss. And then you can see here, you're supposed to come up to this cone and kind of lock the rear tire and trying to kind of skid over and knock that cone over. Super Dave always knows when the video needs a little spicing up, so he was glad to contribute. And I think Super Dave might have played soccer, because that was definitely a dive. Most of the exercises were about finesse and fine control, and I had to leave the field briefly because, as some of you may know, it's very hard to maintain fine motor control if you're a little too focused on controlling certain muscle groups. But anyways, after dealing with that situation, I was back to join the group. Another rule probably to go by is that if you have any worries about whether that taco is still good, you probably should not eat it. I was looking for the group, and I could see by the tire tracks that they must have done something on this side slope, so I took a quick spin up and down the side of this hill, and then off in the distance I could see the group. The bikes you're seeing here on the right are from some of the other groups, and as I mentioned, there's a really wide variety of bikes and skill levels. You can see these bikes here. I'm not even sure they really have, well, semi-aggressive tires, so pretty much something for everyone at this event. As I mentioned before, most of the exercises were geared for big bikes, so you're not going to be doing a lot of motocross style stuff. So this was about fine control, being able to do tight turns. So in this exercise, it was about crossing this berm and then having to do a relatively tight U-turn and then crossing the berm once again. And you couldn't get too much speed to fly over the berm because then you wouldn't be able to make a tight enough U-turn to make your next crossing. And of course, a big bike doesn't feel so big when you've got 3 guys helping you lift it up. And there's certainly no reason to He-Man it and burn yourself out because you know you're going to be picking up that bike a few times at the minimum.
Yep. Go all the way down to the end and hang a left. Oh. Oh. Turn, Dave. Turn. Turn there. Turn here. I got you. Give her. You got it. Give her.
For some reason, at one point, Super Dave was going the wrong way on the course. I don't know if that's because he's from the UK. Here you can see Marc on his Africa Twin, and Marc went right from "this is my new bike and I'm afraid to drop it" to "I don't care." I'm not sure what happened there. I think he might have just stalled it. He was trying to go a little too slow. For you DR fans, there's a mighty DR. For the KLR crew, one of the new gen KLRs was also in our group.
Oh, down she goes.
And of course, we had a couple of the big LC8 KTMs in our group. Here you can get a nice close-up. They sure sound nice. Then it was time for me to stop goofing around with the cameras and actually try to learn how to ride. So you went over the hump. The first U-turn was rather gentle over another hump. Then you had a tighter U-turn. Back over the hump, and another relatively tight U-turn over another hump, and there I kind of botched that one, and I should have gone left there, but at that point I'd blown it, so I headed off into the woods to hide my shame.
Marc, is everything okay? I thought the doctor told you not to lift anything heavy.
Nothing more fun than someone taking a video of you going to the John. We had reached the middle of the morning session, so we headed back to the start point to take a break and have some water. And as you can see, they've got some tents, there's bottled water for everyone, there's some snacks. So this is a nicely run event. Very low-key, very cash, but you can tell it's really well organized. After our little break, we headed back out into the training area, and we ended up at a spot where we had done some exercises the year before. There's a nice little spot here where there's a whole bunch of short, steep little hills. For this drill, you headed up and then down this hill. On the first pass heading down, you went around this little copse of trees, up this steep embankment, Then you swung around and came down this little steep hill. And once again, this is actually steep. But then you had to hang a harder right-hand U-turn, and that put you right at the base of the steepest little hill, where you then had to get on the gas, and then you were done, and you would loop around and get back in line to give it another shot. Next up was JP. Not too much drama. JP just likes doing those descents really slow. And then he unleashes the massive power of the WR250. Swings it around again. Then you really had to make sure you didn't gather too much speed on this downhill. And of course, it's quite easy to do on that small bike. And you can see he's got pretty good traction. And then he unleashes the herd of ponies and makes it up the hill. Then it was Marc on the Africa Twin. Gotta say, this Africa Twin seems like a very nice bike, and I'm not sure what the list price is, but we met a couple of guys at various events, and everybody seems to be getting really good deals on these Africa Twins, somewhere in the $11,000 to $12,000 Canadian range, which seems like a lot of bike for that kind of money. Good clutch control, and then up she goes. Super Dave bidding us all farewell. I had a letter to his family in my pocket in case this all went horribly wrong.
Yeah, 650, just pop the wheel right over it.
And as you can see, we're not being asked to do anything incredibly difficult, but the whole point of this day is to shake off the cobwebs, get back into the groove. Here you can see you got to make this tight right-hander, and then Dave almost had to put a foot down, but slipped the clutch and made it to the top.
I remember this hill.
I know I've said it a million times, but
Come on, buddy, you gotta make it up, otherwise we're all in trouble.
the GoPro always makes a hill look flat. This basically looks like I'm driving down my driveway, but that was actually a hill that you would probably have a little trouble walking up given the loose surface. And here you can see some of the varied terrain that this sandpit area offers. You've got this big steep downhill on the left. No one wanted to get stuck beside someone who wasn't going to make it up the hill, so everybody was waiting for people to filter through one by one. And you can see the big tree on the right. That's a steep downhill. But yet when we get there and you see it from the point of view of the GoPro, it's going to look like we're driving across Saskatchewan. One of our group had had a little trouble getting up the second hill. So here you can see the descent. And this is a steep descent. The kind where, you know, you're on the verge of locking the rear all the way down. You've got some front brake on. Then you had this tight little turn and then just a nice short steep uphill. We did a little more riding and then it was time for lunch. And lunch is actually a pretty decent spread with sandwiches and salads and desserts and soft drinks, juice, water, whatever. So considering that this is a free event, if you join Mototrailaventure, which is very reasonable, you're getting pretty good bang for the buck. With our bellies full, we headed back out and headed over to another area where we had done some exercises the year before. And as you can see, I think here, when we look over to the left, you'll see some snow. So there was still some snow in the shady spots. I'm following Super Dave here. Someone was telling me that a lot of this sand pit, the actual sand, has all been removed, and once they've excavated down to the kind of clay base, they move on. So I think some of these areas are basically done. All the valuable material's been removed. Not quite sure what happened there.
Hold on.
I think Mark is a secret tester for Outback Motor Tech. I believe those are the crash bars he's using. And that's a Canadian company. We've met the owner. He's a super nice guy. He makes products for the Africa Twin. Dave is also using a set of his engine crash guards on his F800GS. And as you can imagine, Dave has put them through quite a bit of testing, and they've done exceedingly well. No damage to Dave's plastics at all, and the bars themselves look great. We then spent a good chunk of the afternoon just riding around on the trail network that's on this property. And it varied from basically gravel roads to nice little 2-track heading through the forest, as well as some really swampy areas because it had been raining pretty good all week.
Woo! I'm down. That was a lot deeper than I thought. Yep. But that's deep. And I don't want to get wet. Hey, I just... didn't want to get wet.
Of course, an Awesome Players video wouldn't be complete without some mud and muck. And in one area of the property, there was mud and muck in abundance.
Nice, JP! Woo! Ah! Yuck, yuck, yuck! I'm getting face mushed here. A lot of big bikes with lots of throttle. Yahoo! Yes, because he took a wrong turn.
There was quite a maze of trails back here, and I was following JP, and JP will never be mistaken for Vasco da Gama because his navigational skills were definitely not up to par today. The group had kind of broken up into a bunch of little subgroups, and there was tire tracks everywhere, and it was very hard to see where the guys in front of you had turned. So we all kind of flailed around in the mud trying to deduce from the tire tracks which way people had turned. It didn't really matter. Everybody was just out there riding around, having a good time.
Deep there, boys. All right, I think we're waiting up here. Somebody else pounded.
Eventually, the group reformed, but on this section, there was a lot of downed trees. This was on a Saturday morning, and on the Friday night, we had had 60-mile-an-hour, 100-kilometer-an-hour winds, so a lot of people were out of electricity, some people for up to a day. So there was a few trees down across the trail here. So those of us in the back of the queue stood around while the boys at the front dragged them out of the way.
JP, in the rhubarb. It saves you a little bit of pain, but not too much.
We got a chance to play around in the mud a little more. Here you can see the other Africa Twin in our group. And this is one of those slow motion tip overs where you're wondering, should we help him? And then Marc leapt into action and just gave him that little nudge he needed. This fellow on the gray Africa Twin was a really good rider. JP tried to take an alternate route here. And I think he realized why no one else had gone that way.
Hey, Dave, give us a show.
And it was time for Super Dave to head into the water. One of the nice things about that F800 is that high air intake. Not that the water here was particularly deep, but it is nice compared to something like an 1150GS or a DR650, where you got to worry a little more about sucking in some water. On the 800, you've pretty much got to be up to the headlight before you're in trouble. Yeah, there was some pretty sloppy stuff here.
Is this the 4th time we've been through here now?
You may also have noticed that we're on the intercoms once again. It really does add another aspect to the riding. Not only are you able to warn your buddies about upcoming obstacles, but it just makes it a lot more of a social event. And we find we don't spend as much time stopping and chatting because we can actually get all of our gossiping done as we ride. We were about halfway through the afternoon session at this point, so once again we headed back to take a little break, hydrate, have a snack. After our little break, we went back out to the training area, and the next drill was squarely aimed at the guys on the big bikes, and it was a technique where you hung your body off kind of the opposite side you normally would trying to do a tight turn. You can see he's hanging off to the inside here and keeping the bike upright, and then getting on the throttle and kind of spinning it around. And the terrain there, it's hard to tell from this angle, but I mean that is a rough, torn up field, and that guy on that 1200GS was able to keep that thing spinning around on the gas, so it was pretty impressive. And of course, you could accomplish the same thing doing it the traditional way, where you hang your body off to the outside and lean the bike. But I think this technique was really geared more for situations where you were riding in really loose sand, where if you leaned a big bike, it might have a tendency to kick out from underneath you. So by doing it the opposite way, you're able to keep the bike vertical and hang your body off on the inside. But the terrain here, I think, was just a little too sticky with a little too much traction for that really to work properly. So most people seem to kind of default to the normal way of doing it. This was a nice 1150GS adventure with a camo wrap on it. We headed off once again out into the riding area. Now I'll just take a moment here to talk a little about mototrailaventure. It's $45 to join for the year, and just the fact that this event with access to this area is free as long as you're a member, and the fact that the event includes lunch is pretty much worth the $45 right there. The other thing you have to realize is that not only does mototrailaventure put on events like this, they also lobby on our behalf to get access to trail networks. So they've done a lot of work working with ATV clubs that have access to certain areas so that we can kind of get in on their access and ride those ATV trails. And in the early days of mototrailaventure, I believe that they were pivotal in getting the government to open up a lot of trails, because there was a lot of trails that motorcycles couldn't use even though they were on public lands. So they were one of the groups, I think, that helped remedy that situation, which right away opened thousands of kilometers of trail There's other groups too, like the Fédération Québécoise des Motos en Route, the fqhmr, which are involved in lobbying as well. They're not focused solely though on street legal motorcycles. Mototrailaventure is more about dual sport adventure guys, and the fqhmr is more, I think, about guys running off-road only bikes. We got a chance to play around in this spot where we had a lot of fun the year before. This would be the kind of spot where you could probably spend an entire day just having a really good time with your buddies. One of the things we noticed as we were driving up to the event was that even though this is kind of out in the country, there is development encroaching on this sand pit, and apparently, you know, the same story. This place has been here forever, and then the adjoining lands get sold off, and all of a sudden there's housing developments, and then you start to get the complaints from people who don't like the noise. Although I've got to say, you know, every time we stopped out here and took off our helmets, we couldn't hear the other groups. So I think unless you had an obnoxiously loud exhaust, I can't imagine someone a kilometer away would hear anything more than a faint rumble. At one point, I decided I would be Super Dave's wingman so I could try to get some interesting shots. A lot of the times I find it more interesting to be following someone. Here I decided to really try to get close. And Dave kind of lost traction there, and I caught up to him, and I was going to ram into him, so I gave it a little front brake.
Sorry, Dave.
And down I went.
No, but I fell. I was trying to get close to you to get a good shot, and then when you got to the top, you kind of stopped.
The last exercise would be focused on how to get over a log. Once again, this is mainly for big bikes, so you could kind of just drive over it and then push with your legs and spin. The second technique was about just kind of leaning back and letting the wheel just ride over it because the wheel is big enough to clear it. The third technique would be a little more advanced, where you would bounce the front end down and give it a little gas and hop over. Sadly, on one of the demonstrations where our instructor was going the other way, the bike took a really weird bounce and kind of clipped a tree that unfortunately was a fair size, and the old 1150GS Adventure took a bit of a beating. The front end there was pretty mangled, but it still ran. You can see by the mark on the tree here that it was a pretty good impact. Luckily, nobody was hurt. Here you can see Marc trying it. Nice technique. Barely touched it. JP gives it a try. Does the bounce. Very nice. Meanwhile, I think Super Dave was done. So we headed back to the start point, and as is the norm for these kind of things, everybody was standing around, kind of looking back on the day's activities. How was it?
It was good.
Yeah?
Yeah. I was tired, but it was good. Now I want to go home, have a beer, and nap.
I like your hat, Dave.
Got a new line in banana hats. They're only $5.99.
How was your day?
The day was brilliant. The day was really good. Only dropped it twice.
Only twice?
All right, 3 times.
No.
Liar.
Four, but I picked it up twice on my own.
How was it?
The best was the outside turning practice.
Yes.
That one was new for me. Awesome day. So, Mr. Riley, what did you think of your day?
Man, it proved how rusty I really am. That was pretty pathetic, actually. A lot of the guys on the bigger bikes had less trouble than I do, so I guess I better get my act together.
What happened on the uphill where you maybe flew off the up?
Dave was coming up. I wanted to be beside him to get a nice shot, so it was really steep on the side. When Dave got to the top, he had barely enough momentum
and I had to give it a little more gas. So I was going to run into him, so I jammed on the brakes. There was about this much space underneath my left foot, and shaboom! But good day.
Awesome.
And I roosted him for it.
I hope you enjoyed riding along with us today. If you would like to leave us a comment, you can do that here on YouTube. Also, hit the like button, let us know you like the video, and of course hit the subscribe button, and then you'll be the first to know when we have a new video coming out. You can also head over to awesomeplayers.com, and there you can find our email contact information, as well as on the order tab you can click there and get one of our stickers, which is great for covering up the inevitable scratches that happen on a day like today. You can also find us on Facebook, and we have a page where players from all around the world drop in, send us pictures and videos, and that can also be a fun place to leave us a comment or ask us a question about anything at all. I hope you enjoyed another small adventure of the Awesome Players Off-Road Motorcycle Club. Thanks for watching.